As it says in the title, this video is more about the woodworking than the actual speakers themselves. If you're interested in that aspect, there's a lot more information on my website. You can go and check that out. There's a link in the description. Now, the majority of this will be built from solid cherry, so I've got a rough board here that I've cut in half, and then cut that in half again, trim off the end. And before I go any further, I need to flatten one side, and I'll pass that over my homemade jointer to do that, which does a really good job. And now I need to trim off the edges, of course. And what this does is it cleans that up, and it also gets rid of the worst of the sapwood. The sapwood is the lighter colored wood. And now I'm drawing a line to reference while I resaw these pieces. What I want are boards for the sides of the thing, and I also want a sheet of veneer, basically, to put on the front. So that's what that gives me. And to keep the boards flat, I clamped them all together using most of the clamps I have. And here are the selections for the veneer. These two look good. But I've got 4 to work with, so I've got 2 spares, which, as it turns out, was handy because this wood has a little bit of curly grain and it's all over the place. And as you can see, it just tore out huge chunks in places. Now what I need to do is cut the front and back panel for the box, and I'm going to be using 1/2-inch plywood for that. So I need the pieces, especially now for the front part, which I'm going to glue that veneer on, but I already cut and planed down. And to do that, I'm using polyurethane construction adhesive, which I'm spreading on very thin here. And I'll position a sheet and fire in some pins just to hold it, keep it from moving. They're out of the line of cut. Now I'm adding the other 2 pieces that I cut as cawls, so I'll spread the load from the clamps better. While the glue is drying on the veneer, I can go ahead with some other operations here. I'm planing the boards that'll make up the sides, top and bottom. And here I'm passing one edge through the jointer to square that up and straighten it. And now trim off the end on the miter saw to make that one end perfectly square. And I mark that on there as well. And I can then cut those to length, 16 inches long, on my table saw, being very careful. This is a wide cut, and that's usually a dangerous thing to do, unless you know what you're doing, which I do. And that gives me, 4 pieces for the top and bottom, and the 4 sides as well. Now, it's actually the next day, so the glue dried on the veneer, so I can trim those panels down by ripping a little bit off each edge, as you can see here, and then trim off the end as well on the miter saw, and that squares that up nicely, and you can see the plywood underneath. Now I had to make a sample because I'm going to make a miter cut here, and it has to be perfectly 90 degrees, so I always make a sample first from scrap wood before I do any actual cutting. And here I'm making that first miter cut. And you can see I put a 0 clearance piece in there, and that's double-sided tape down. But as it turns out, it wasn't slippery enough, so I added some packing tape on there to make it slicker, so it would, the boards wouldn't stick to it as much. Now I'm making one of the wider cuts, and that's especially good, the slippery part for that, because you definitely don't want it to tilt while it's going through. And that turned out well. Now, to cut the other end, what I need to do is I need to just flatten that miter a little bit, because it's almost impossible to make a perfect miter cut there that'll sit tight against the fence. So I did that with the hand plane, and now I'll cut the other side in the same way. And now I need to put those parts together, the top, the bottom, and the front. And to do that, I put tape on, and here I'm checking it, doing a rough check to make sure that it's accurate. And it was a little bit off, so the best way to take it off there is just to scrape it off with a chisel. And that really that's all it needed. And now I'm using stronger tape to do this. The last thing I want is the tape to break while this glue up is happening. And I'll put some regular wood glue on there and spread that out with my finger. And then I can close it up and put one of my wooden bar clamps on there to, not to put a lot of pressure on, it's just to get it so that it's the correct distance. Now, moving on, I'm going to cut some slots into the side panels here, and then again into the part that I just glued up. It's the next day again, or several hours later anyway. And what these slots are for full-length splines that will reinforce those butt joints. And you can see here how that goes together. And to glue this joint up, because I need more time, I'm using polyurethane construction adhesive, getting it into the slots and pushing the splines in, and then getting it in the slots on the side parts as well before putting it together. And like this has a long open time, so I got 2 boxes glued up at the same time, and I got them both clamped up together at the same time using several of my wooden bar clamps to do that. Now the next day again, and putting the box in my quick release vise to do some sanding on it, because there was a lot of sanding involved in this. Yes, sanding is very important to a project like this, both by machine and then finish it up by hand. By hand is very important. It gets rid of the swirl marks from the machine. Now what I'm doing is I'm adding cleats on the inside, very small ones, to help hold the back in. And basically what they do is they stop the back from going all the way in. And what I'm doing here is I'm drilling the holes for the banana jacks. That'll be the connector for the speaker. And they just fit in these holes that are counterbore and drilled out to fit, so they're flush on the back and look good. Now I'm beveling the back edge of the panel a little bit for glue clearance, and I'll once again use polyurethane construction adhesive to do that, and just put the panel in, push it down tight. I use a couple of clamps to put minimal pressure on there to keep it flush, and then the next day again I sanded that flush as well. Now I need to cut out the recesses for the speakers, and I always, once again, make a sample for that from scrap plywood to make sure that the diameter is correct. I don't want to mess up this box that I put so much time into by cutting an oversized hole. And then to cut the hole, I'm using the router with a circle jig, and I'll do the outside first in one pass, and then I'll widen that out. I'm only going down the depth of the flange at that point, but then I go deeper as I move in to actually cut the hole. Except I didn't cut all the way through. I left a little bit to trim out of there with the knife so that I wouldn't lose the center. I can take that out and keep it for something else. And sand the edge, of course, to clean everything else up. And then I think, yes, I put the speaker in to try it out. And that's a nice fit, nice and flush with the surface. And I did the same for the tweeter holes, of course, and here's the tweeter plate that I had to make, and that fits perfectly as well. And what I'm doing now is I'm rounding over the front edge. This helps with diffraction, more about that in the website article if you're interested. And I'm basically doing this all with a climb cut, easing into it, 3 passes. And I didn't go all the way, so I wouldn't round over, like slip off. I'll finish that up by just sanding it by hand. That's the safest way. You definitely don't want to go past and slip off. That would be bad. So more sanding, of course, easing over the corners. Nice sharp miter there that I had to ease over. And sand all the face and all that. And inside the holes, just to remove any furry stuff before coating the inside of the box, the solid wood part at least, with linseed oil to seal it. And here what I'm doing is I'm driving nails into my workbench to act as a stand for finishing. I'm going to give the box a coat of linseed oil to begin with, and I'll set that on the nails, and then I'll do the rest like that. And what the linseed oil does is it gives it a color that I like on cherry, and it also fills up the grain a little bit so that it accentuates it a bit more. I gave that first coat overnight to dry, and here I'm lightly sanding it, and I'm putting on what will be several coats of tinted Danish oil. And what this is tinted with is actually a little bit of stain, a cherry stain actually. And the effect that this has is very subtle, like it's not a high build thing. Basically what you do is you brush it on thin and then wipe most of it away, and it leaves a very thin film. From here, I added several more coats of the Danish oil to make it look richer, and then I topped that up with 2 coats of clear polyurethane to finish it off. And then I put speakers in to make them look finished, even though they're not. Speakers are not wired up, and I still have a crossover to build for this, and that'll be in an upcoming video. I'll do that, and I'll finish these out. But you can pretend that the music that you're hearing now is actually coming from these speakers.